The second my father said those words, something shifted inside me. Not fear, not panic, something closer to quiet amusement. Because while my entire family had spent months consumed by my sister's upcoming wedding, not a single one of them had noticed the most important thing that had happened in my life. I had already graduated. I already had a career. And I was already earning more money than the man on the other end of that phone call trying to threaten me. He thought he had leverage. He had absolutely nothing. Let me take you back because this story only makes sense if you understand where I came from. My name is Priya. I'm 24 years old, and for most of my life, I was the second daughter, which in my family basically meant I was the background character in someone else's story. My older sister Natalie was the son that everything orbited around. Her dance recitals, her college choices, her friendship drama, her career confusion. It all got airtime. It all got energy. It all got my parents' full and undivided attention. Me, I was usually introduced at family gatherings as Natalie's little sister, like my own name was optional information. I used to think that was just how families worked. Then I got older and realized, no, that's just how my family worked. When Natalie wanted a car for college, they found the money. When she switched her major twice and took an extra 2 years to graduate, nobody said a word about the cost. When she needed bailing out of her various financial situations, there was always a solution waiting. I watched all of it and learned one lesson very early. Don't ask for too much, because the answer was usually disappointment. So I stopped asking. I put my head down instead. I worked part-time through most of my degree. I studied hard, stayed focused, kept my grades up quietly. And somewhere along the way, something unexpected happened. I started excelling. Not in a showy way. Just steadily, consistently, in the way that builds something real over time. What my family didn't know was that I had graduated 6 months ahead of schedule. What they really didn't know was that I'd accepted a remote position at a growing tech company before I even walked across that stage. The salary was the kind of number that would have made my 18-year-old self feel dizzy. I didn't tell anyone. Not because I was ashamed, I was genuinely proud. But every time something good happened in my life, it somehow ended up looping back to Natalie. Someone would compare us. Someone would make a comment. The achievement would get absorbed into the family drama and come out smaller on the other side. Keeping quiet felt like the simplest way to protect something that was finally fully mine. Then one Thursday, my phone rang. I almost let it go to voicemail. Almost. It was my father, and within 60 seconds, I understood why he was calling. Natalie's wedding was 3 weeks out, and my attendance was, in his words, not optional. I explained calmly, clearly, "Gefa fa sauce," that I had a work commitment that weekend, something I had known about for weeks, something I genuinely could not reschedule. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that I thought the call had dropped. Then he said it. "If you don't show up for your sister's wedding, we're pulling your tuition support." I sat very still. I looked out the window for a moment. And then I said, "Okay," and ended the call. Because here's the thing he didn't know. There was no tuition left. The threat he'd been saving for exactly this kind of moment had an expiration date, and it had already passed. By the next morning, the entire extended family had apparently been briefed on my decision. My phone filled up fast. My mother texted first, then an aunt, then 2 cousins I hadn't spoken to properly in months. The narrative had already been written before anyone thought to ask me for my side of it. "Your sister only gets married once." That was my aunt. "Work can wait. Family can't." That was a cousin. "How can you be so selfish?" That was someone I barely remembered at family gatherings, but who apparently felt very strongly about this. I read every message. I didn't respond to any of them. There was no point. Nobody was asking what I thought. They were telling me what to think, what to feel, what to do. I'd spent 24 years navigating exactly this, and I knew the difference between a conversation and a verdict. Natalie, meanwhile, was posting wedding countdowns online almost every single day. Each photo had a caption about loyalty, family, and being surrounded by the people who matter. The timing was pointed. Maybe it was deliberate. Maybe she genuinely didn't realize how it looked. Either way, the message came through loud and clear. Show up or be blamed. Old memories kept surfacing through all of it, the kind you don't let yourself think about too often because they sting in a specific, quiet way. The college trip I'd had to skip because emergency funds had been redirected toward one of Natalie's situations. The academic recognition ceremony my parents missed because it fell on the same day as her recital. Every moment where being the responsible one meant being the invisible one. Back then, I'd accepted it as just the way things were. Now I just watched it from a distance with the kind of clarity that only comes after you've spent time building something outside of it. Work, meanwhile, was going beautifully. My manager called midweek with news I hadn't expected. A major client had specifically asked for me by name. The promotion I'd been quietly working towards suddenly felt very close. And here I was, being treated by my family like an irresponsible student, while the rest of my life was moving faster than I'd even planned for. The wedding day came on a Saturday, and for the first time in my life, I didn't rearrange myself to fit into Natalie's moment. I went to work. The voicemail came mid-afternoon. I already knew what it would say before I pressed play. My father's voice was sharp and clipped, the way it got when he was angry, but trying to maintain control. Natalie was hurt. The family was embarrassed. And then the line he'd been building toward for 3 weeks. "Since you've made your choice, we're done paying your tuition." I stared at the phone. I played it again. And then for the first time in a very long time, I felt something release inside my chest. Like a knot I'd stopped noticing had finally come loose. The family group chat was already moving fast by the time I opened it. Dozens of messages, one after another, confusion, criticism, disappointment, judgment. A whole chorus of people who had made up their minds without asking a single question. I read everything. Then I typed my response. Not an argument, not a defense, just the truth. I thanked my parents for what they had contributed to my education over the years, and then I shared something none of them knew. 6 months ago, I graduated. My degree is complete. There is no tuition to cancel. The group chat went silent in a way that felt almost loud. Then the questions came slowly at first. People thought I was joking. Someone asked me to clarify, so I shared a photo from my graduation ceremony. Then, a screenshot of the company announcement welcoming me to the team. Then, my job title because someone asked. That's when things got interesting. Because once people started looking up the role, the company, the industry, they started doing math. And the math told a story my family had never imagined. I wasn't struggling. I wasn't scraping by on support and part-time work. I had my own apartment. I paid my own bills. I had been fully financially independent for 6 months. And yes, my income was higher than my father's. The people who had called me selfish that morning went very quiet. Others started reaching out privately. My aunt, who had sent that pointed text about Natalie only getting married once, messaged to say she hadn't realized I was already working. A cousin apologized. People who had barely acknowledged me in years suddenly wanted to know how I'd done it, what the company was, what my path had looked like. Meanwhile, Natalie's wedding had stopped being the main topic of conversation in the family group chat, and from what I heard later, she noticed. My parents struggled most of all. The tool they had reached for, the one they had kept sharpened for exactly this moment, had turned out to be nothing. The daughter they believed was dependent on them had built an entire life while they were busy looking the other direction. 3 weeks after the wedding, something happened that I genuinely didn't expect. My parents asked to meet me. Not summoned, not demanded, asked. We sat at a small restaurant, halfway between their home and mine. For the first few minutes, nobody quite knew how to start. Then my father said something I hadn't heard from him in a very long time. "We didn't know." "I know," I said, and I meant it. That was the honest truth of it. They hadn't known, not because I had gone out of my way to hide things, but because they had spent so many years pointed toward Natalie that they'd simply stopped looking my way. I explained what that felt like, not with anger, just with honesty. I talked about the ceremonies they'd missed, the milestones that went unacknowledged, the particular loneliness of being the reliable one in a family that treated reliability as invisibility. They listened. Really listened. My mother apologized. It didn't fix the past, but it opened a door. Slowly, carefully, we began rebuilding something. Not the same relationship we'd had before, but something more honest. Something with actual space for me in it. I set boundaries, real ones, and for the first time they didn't push back. Maybe because they finally understood that I wasn't asking for permission anymore. The biggest thing I took from all of it wasn't about money or careers or proving anyone wrong. It was this. For most of my life, I had been measuring my own worth by how much my family noticed me, chasing a kind of approval that always seemed to land just out of reach. And the moment I stopped chasing it, the moment I just quietly built something real and let it speak for itself, everything changed. My father thought he could redirect my future with a single threat. What he didn't realize was that while everyone was busy looking at Natalie, I had already built a life they never saw coming. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't prove people wrong loudly. It's simply outgrow the need for their approval and let them figure out the rest on their own. And if this story hit close to home, drop a comment below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, now's a good time. There's more where this came from.